We begin with President Biden's bitter farewell to the American people. Now, with just hours left in his over 50-year political career, Biden used his final address to launch veiled attacks at President-elect Trump, his allies, and the millions of Americans who support him. And do not forget that 4 years ago, Biden promised to be a president for all Americans. He repeatedly preached about unity. Here is how he began his presidency with his inaugural address.
To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. With unity. Write an American story of hope, not fear, of unity, not division, of light, not darkness.
High hopes, unity, it's a beautiful thing. Well, watch how he ended his presidency.
Whether we show the courage to stand up to the abuse of power or we yield to it. Abuse of power. The president's power is not limited. It's not absolute. Power and profit. Dangerous concentration of power. Concentration of technology, power, and wealth. No president is immune from crimes and oligarchies taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy.
Kevin, I love to listen to these historic moments, and I love to keep tallies. And unity, the tally I kept, was nearly half a dozen when he began. It was nearly half a dozen abuse of power. He ends on a bitter note, not a high note. And I prefer Biden 1.0, not the 2.0 we saw last night.
I think we should give respect to the first 46 years of the work and what he gave to the country. Unfortunately, his legacy has been tainted by the last four on metrics that everybody is going to remember for a long time. Border security, number one, a collapse in our position in terms of foreign policy, and inflation that just brutalized the average American family. They're not going to forgive him for that. 70% of the people feel that way this morning. Now, you go 20 years later, you think, gee, Nixon, he came out of that a little better. The same with Carter. I don't think they're going to forgive Joe Biden. It's going to be very tough. And I think he tainted his family name. I'm thinking, can a Biden go and become a board member of the Smithsonian, for example, today? I think they wouldn't do it. I think he's hurt his brand by pardoning his son after saying he wouldn't do it. And I don't want to beat up on a man who's served for so long, 50 years, but he did it to himself. It's not like anybody made him do these things. He did it to himself. And he made a lot of mistakes, and people are not going to forgive him for the three and maybe the fourth on the son. I'm sorry to say it, but it's the truth.
I think you said that so well. You know, as I was thinking, what do I want to say last night after he gives his farewell address? I had in my notes 50-year political career. This is someone who incurred personal tragedy in life, who really rose from the ashes, became a United States senator, ran for president, became president. None of us will become president. He did. I wanted to acknowledge all of those accomplishments. But then he talked about an oligarchy coming to America, Emily. He made this bitter. It could have been about his storied political career. It did not. And here's the irony. To your point, Kevin, these two headlines. Look at this. CNN poll. Biden leaves office with his approval rating matching the lowest of his term. Okay? Now, how's this for irony? Fox poll. Trump is the most popular he has ever been. So the abuse of power, he warned, well, it's a pretty popular president coming in.
I was at an event this week in New York City for a particular book launch, wherein as the speaker was talking and said, you know, why and how did Trump win? And someone from the audience said, Biden. And everyone laughed. But the whole point is, it's true. And I thought last night's speech struck me not as a president at the penultimate finale of his 50 years of service, but almost as a junior political officer talking about what should happen. In fact, I was struck by the fact that he never once, it seemed, articulated any of his accomplishments, because at the end of it, what I was left with was a to-do list. And the interesting thing about the to-do list is that it seemed to have such a hypocritical landing. You know, as he talked about the congressman and trading stocks and Yet we know Nancy Pelosi and so many others have had so many questionable stock trades as he talks about the oligarchy, as he talks about China, that America should take precedence over China. In all of those and more, we saw reflected in it. I thought, well, then why, Mr. President, did you make the decisions that you did? As he talked about the military-industrial complex, as if it's bad, which it can be, and he just passed through a $500 million Ukraine package. I mean, every sentence he said, in my head, I was like, well, then why did you do this, Mr. President? And for him to land on what needs to be done, unfortunately, undermine his own legacy of service that he could have ended on one of those, that landing in the Olympics, the one landing after the vault, the one leg landing after the vault. Unfortunately, I think he took a spill.
I love that you mentioned hypocrisy, because I do think that's a word that summed up the speech. At one point, he chose to lecture all of you about paying your taxes. Listen to this.
That's exactly what we've done. People should be able to make as much as they can, but play by the same rules. Pay their fair share of taxes. So much is at stake.
Here's the irony, Harris. As he said that, Doug Mills, the famous photographer, popped up a picture online of Hunter Biden over to the side, who didn't pay his fair share in taxes, but thankfully Dad gave him a pardon.
Timing is everything.
Yeah.
Taking that picture, that shot at that one time. Two things come to mind and did as I was watching. One is he's been done with us, the American people, for quite a while. Like, I think he quit. My mother used to say, when you're leaving something, don't quit before you go, because the last thing you do is what they remember. He quit us. He quit on us, bro. And he did it, I think, right after they put Kamala in his seat. Yet he had all those months left to be president of the United States. And he started immediately working on himself on those days that he was not at the beach in Delaware. But he started not working for us, but tacitly working against us. And then he made it really clear that he was working against us by taking more than 600 million acres of oil that we could tap into to become energy independent again by taking that and banning it, taking it out of Trump's hands to keep the promises on energy to help bring down inflation. The other thing I think that became abundantly clear to me, because he looked so visceral and had so much acrimony when you could understand him reading the prompter. And look, we just watched a replay of June 27th. He was having a hard time communicating. But it became clear to me that his team does not have his back. Like, didn't anybody look at the speech? It was clearly in the prompter. Like, why would you even go down a road where when the pertinent question gets asked, you're not prepped for it? Anybody could have told him that they would ask if the ceasefire and hostage release deal had anything to do with Trump's recent words about they'll be hell to pay if you don't let him go before Inauguration Day. He wasn't ready for that. And then reflexively, as he does, he's a mean guy. He turns around, oh, is that a joke? I mean, they didn't even prep him. He has not had the team to get him ready for the biggest moments, even before he took his eye off us. But it's especially important now because our enemies are really leaning in. By the way, the deal as of this hour has not been solidified yet because the Israeli cabinet hasn't voted on that yet. So he could have been magnanimous and said, you know what? Let's wait till it comes officially into play. But meanwhile, it takes everybody to get a deal like this. How hard is that?
Jerry, on the point about the team, I was reading some interesting color this morning, some reporting. They were enjoying pizza in the West Wing. Nothing wrong with that. My staff, we used to order food. We ordered Domino's, actually, as a team, so nothing wrong with that. But they particularly enjoyed the oligarchy part that he mentioned. Now, when they followed up and said, who are the oligarchs, the team would not clarify. Someone on the team said, oh, maybe Elon Musk. A reporter, asked, so they gently leaned in without saying it's Elon Musk. But you've got to presume he's meaning Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, these billionaires who helped to build the country, who are now, saying maybe we should be a little more equitable.
Where is the credit? Where is the credit for these guys? Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, Bezos, you name it, a number of CEOs who have made big differences for this country and have led us to be #1 in technology. These are the people who are going to lead us in AI, and we have to dominate AI because if we don't, China will. So kudos to these guys. They've done a lot for us. And the whole idea that the left is mad at Elon Musk makes me crazy because he's the one who developed their favorite product in the world, the electric car. So how can you be mad at him?
Yeah. And look, hey, if you want to achieve parity at your newspaper or on Facebook and achieve free speech, by all means, like, this is a great and noble cause. So welcome to the party we've all been at for years and years.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.